Every athlete leaves something behind. Not just records, but moments that changed the way the game felt. Some stories are loud. This one isn't. Tonight, we slow it all down. And listen. This is The Quiet Fire. The untold story of Christian McCaffrey's rise, fall, and redemption. A pale morning in Highlands Ranch, Colorado. The kind where frost clings to backyard fences like it's holding on to time. In one of those quiet houses where cleats sit beside the door and trophies gather dust in forgotten corners, a boy opened his eyes. Christian McCaffrey, though few knew his name yet. Just a kid, maybe 11 or 12, feet too quick for the staircase, laughter echoing before he even filled the room. The house hummed gently with the history of games won and games lost, of cheers folded into dinner conversations, and fleeting memories stored in storage bins labeled, Ed's Playing Days. But Christian wasn't thinking of that. He was thinking of the game. Not in grandeur, not in spotlight, just in feeling. The sound the laces make as they slap the hardwood floor. The bounce of a football that never rolls the way you want it to. The thrill of running alone. No clock, no coach, just cold air and breath in steady rhythm. There's a kind of innocence that glows before greatness ever arrives. That sacred calm before the world whispers your name. He lived there, for a while. He wasn't chasing anything. Not yet. The backyard was enough. The old swing was still crooked. The blue plastic bat cracked. But it was his universe. His older brothers threw tighter spirals. His friends talked louder. But Christian just moved. Moved smoother, quieter, like water poured slow into still water. Some said he ran like a secret. As if he knew something the rest of us didn't. He hadn't grown into his shadow yet. The towering presence of a father whose name echoed in Super Bowl lore. For now, Christian only knew the sound of his own heartbeat, flaring up whenever he had the ball and the rest of the world disappeared. You could tell something flickered cleaner in him, even then. One family friend remembered a snowy morning practice. While most kids dragged their feet, grinning in complaint, Christian sprinted full tilt through the cold. No gloves. No jacket, just drive. The coach asked, "You trying to make the NFL today?" He didn't answer, but he smiled. That quiet little smile, not proud, not cocky. Just sure. No one knew then that one day he'd break hearts and records in the very same play. Nobody knew how loud his silence would grow. And he had no idea that while he was chasing nothing in particular, something was already chasing him. Expectation, legacy, the weight that waits in the dark for the first kid in the family who dares to run ahead of it. Some stars burst onto the scene. Others burn slow, invisible, until the day they don't. He was still just a boy. Just a whisper. But the fire, it was already there. Low, patient, waiting for its moment to roar. In the McCaffrey home, noise had its place. It wasn't wild or reckless, it was rhythm. The thud of shoes kicked off by the front door. The laughter of 4 boys wrestling for the last pancake. The gentle squeak of worn footballs as they passed hand to hand, again and again. Ed McCaffrey, Christian's father, was not a loud man, but his legacy had weight. 3 Super Bowl rings tucked away in soft velvet. A career painted in bruises and banners. Christian saw the pictures, the grainy highlights, the way neighbors still lit up when they spoke of his dad hauling in catches for Elway, standing tall in midnight games with pressure that squeezed the air out of a stadium. But Ed never paraded it. His stories lived in metaphors, in delayed lessons, never in boasts. Still, Christian heard it, felt it in the way strangers tilted a head when they met him. McCaffrey? Any relation to? Whispers. Little reminders that for some, his life had already been written. His oldest brothers chased that name too. Max, Dylan, Luke, they sweat under its armor like young knights. Every pass play in the backyard meant something more. A test, a rehearsal, But Christian, he never fought the shadow. He studied it, sat closer to it, watched how his dad spoke after a loss, watched how he carried groceries so the boys wouldn't have to, observed the rituals, ice packs, vitamins, prayer, patience. There was no firework moment that lit the boy's soul with certainty. Only the slow drip of legacy through ceiling cracks and dinner table stories told sideways. And in those moments, Christian learned something early, that greatness didn't come with a roar. It came with routine, discipline dressed as love, and love, sometimes, draped in silence. One night, while dishes clinked and ESPN murmured in the background, Christian sat with his dad in the garage. Not much was said. The Broncos helmet sat dusty atop an old shelf. Ed looked at it once, then back at his son. "You don't have to be me," he said, as if parting fog. "But if you ever want this, just know it doesn't wait for you." Christian didn't respond. He just reached for a flat football and started pumping air into it. Later, alone in his room, he tried on his brother Max's old shoulder pads. Too big, straps dangling, but he looked in the mirror anyway. Just for a second, not posing, just preparing. Childhood was still thick around him, morning cartoons, scraped knees, cereal boxes. But the world had already left its map on his pillow. Not pressure, not yet. But early questions. Was it possible to outrun a name without ever turning your back on it? Could you follow in someone's footsteps, and still chart your own? The answer, he'd learn, wasn't in rebellion. It was in redefinition. Legacy wasn't a ladder, it was a mirror. You didn't climb it. You made peace with your reflection until it looked like no one else's. That night, as frost climbed the windows and the house settled into sleep, Christian laced up a pair of too small cleats and tiptoed out to the backyard. Not to play, not to train, just to run, back and forth, barely breathing, footfalls silent in the snow-packed grass. Only the moon saw him. Only the wind kept count. He didn't know what he was chasing, but something inside him whispered, "Keep going." He didn't speak much when he played. Not out of shyness, not fear. It just wasn't necessary. The field understood him. At recess, while others argued over who got to play quarterback, Christian simply waited. When the game began, he moved, not loud, not boastful, just quicker. Like he'd already been to the end zone and come back. Some said he had natural talent. Coaches tilted their heads and marked his name, not knowing why the kid stood out, only that he always seemed to be 2 thoughts ahead of the game. But to Christian, it wasn't about standing out. It was about blending in so quietly with the rhythm of the play that it felt like music. He didn't push, he flowed. As if his feet heard a beat nobody else had quite learned to count. His mother once found a spiral notebook under his bed. Dozens of pages, mostly sketches of plays. Arrows, numbers, little stick figures with roots curling like vines across margins. He never showed anyone. It wasn't about recognition. Not yet. He was still collecting the feeling. That strange electricity that came before the ball hit his hands. That silence before the snap when possibility stretched thinner than breath. Friends noticed it first. He never looked like he was trying, one said. But no one could catch him. That smoothness, it didn't scream potential. It whispered it, like watching a paper plane glide longer than it should, like somewhere beneath the skin was something waiting to unfold. Once, during a middle school game, the score hardly mattered. It was late, the field half lit, cleats muddy. Christian took a handoff, dipped left, spun right, vanished between defenders. From the bleachers, it looked like a blur, an accident of quickness. But watching him afterward, sitting alone with his helmet on, laces tangled at his feet, anyone paying attention could tell. He'd seen the whole play unfold before it happened. He wasn't bigger. He wasn't louder. He just knew. Back home, after the lights and noise faded, he returned to routine. Laid out his socks carefully. aligned his cleats toe to toe. Not superstition, just reverence. He didn't tell classmates that his dad played in the NFL. Didn't correct them when they asked. He liked the quiet better. Because something sacred lived in the silence of being unknown. In Valor Christian's hallways, he walked without flair. Slipped into rooms. Raised his hand only when it counted. There was no need to announce his intentions. The game would do that for him eventually. And if anyone stayed behind after practice, if they watched him run one extra sprint, adjust his stance again, take one silent representative with no coach around, they'd understand. This boy wasn't practicing, he was praying with motion. And behind every breath, every half-step of hesitation, something inside him burned gently. Not ambition, not yet, something older, simpler, the knowing that someday the game would call his name. And when it did, he wouldn't need to raise his voice. He'd be ready. They didn't talk about it much, how good he was. Valor Christian wasn't the kind of place that shouted. It bred quiet confidence, morning weight room sessions, and afternoons that bled from classrooms to practice fields with no announcement. But every so often, someone stayed long enough to watch. To notice. The way he carried the ball with both hands, not out of fear, but respect. The way he waited a half-second longer for his blocks to open, trusting the tiniest crease like it was scripture. The way defenders hesitated, not because they couldn't catch him, but because they didn't know how. He didn't celebrate when he scored. Not really. Maybe a nod, a glance toward the sideline. His name was starting to bubble in state rankings, whispered among evaluators, but in Littleton, he was still Christian. Still the boy who stayed after practice to run sprints in the dusk, footsteps echoing across empty grass. Each Friday night brought a new team, a new test. And each time, the result was nearly the same. Cuts sharp as breath, acceleration almost imperceptible until it was too late. Coaches began shaking their heads before the play ended. Opposing players watched old film and still arrived late. His teammates called it balance. His coaches called it instinct. He didn't call it anything. Once, after a game where he totaled over 300 yards and 4 touchdowns, he walked off the field as quietly as he'd entered. No celebration, just a hand on his helmet strap, jaw clenched like there was still work to do. A reporter asked him afterward how he made it look so easy. He shrugged. "I don't think about it too much," he said. "I just follow the play and see where the open space is." But one assistant coach later added, "No, he runs like he's carrying something. Like there's more behind it than just yards." They never said what. Maybe it was legacy. Maybe it was weight. But Christian made every carry feel like it mattered. Like the game itself had decided he was the conductor now, and the rest of the world would listen at his tempo. Scouts began to show up. Power 5 schools sent recruiters in pressed polos and quiet notebooks. One by one, letters came. Duke, Michigan, Stanford, Oregon, UCLA. But this wasn't a parade. It was a hallway locker with envelopes stuffed inside until someone forced him to open them. He kept playing, kept returning kicks, catching passes, running holes that weren't there for anyone else. No moment swallowed him. No headline distracted him. Everything stayed internal. Like his greatness only existed if he refused to acknowledge it. There's a clip from one game. Blurred footage from a parent's phone. It shows a kickoff return. Christian catches it at the 5-yard line, weaves through 6 defenders, and scores untouched. The crowd erupts. On the sideline, someone throws a fist in the air. But in the end zone, he just places the ball on the ground and jogs off. There's something sacred about knowing you're good, and never needing to say it. He started breaking school records in short order. The local paper offered interviews. He declined, not out of rudeness, but because the game felt quieter without the noise. His coach once asked him what he wanted from football. He thought for a moment, then said, To be better. Not famous. Not known. Just better. And yet, as the stories spread, and his numbers piled, even the quiet corners of Colorado began to stir. Who is this kid? Is he really that fast? But nothing said more than how he carried himself. Practice. Classroom. Game day. No flash. Just fundamentals. Just flow. The secret of valor wasn't that they had a star. It was that their star seemed more like a monk. Focused. Disciplined. Humble. Until game time. Then it was like watching somebody remember who they were all over again. And each week, that memory got sharper. In the still corners of Christian's room, there were notebooks, not decorated, not flashy. Just spiral bounds with creased spines and smudged pages, filled with practice schedules, diagrams, small reminders that belonged to no one but him. While other high school nights were spent scanning for curfews and cruising for company, Christian's eyes were on film. Quietly, steadily, the whirring of game tape had become a kind of lullaby. No coach demanded it, no parent enforced it, he simply did it. Because Christian wasn't just obsessed with playing the game. He was obsessed with understanding it. Why a safety shifted a foot too far one way. Why the guard pulled late on third down. Why some players chased the play, and why he learned to let it find him. There was joy there, but also pressure. A pressure not shouted, but soaked in. It didn't come from his father. Ed rarely forced the issue, rarely brought up his glory days. But it was in the air, just the same. Like the hum of a silent melody behind every interaction. Sometimes, when Christian trained alone, he could feel it most in his lungs. Like he was running with someone on his back. Not someone real. Something. Expectation. Legacy. Earned privilege. No one said these things. But he understood their echoes. A quiet deal had been made. When you're born into a name, you carry it. Whether you ask for it or not. So he trained in the dark. He wrote goals in shorthand. He ate meals like rituals, measured sleep in hours and recovery in millimeters. Not because anyone asked it of him, but because he sensed the invisible clock already ticking. Time, expecting him. Max was in his own prime by then. Dylan was coming up, too. All talented, all hungry. But Christian's hunger was different. Not loud, not sharp, just constant. A slow burn that never flickered out. Sometimes he questioned it, but not often out loud. Just in the pauses between reps. In the silence after closing the notebook. In the few seconds alone after another 6 a.m. workout. Sweat cooling on his back, wondering what it was that kept pulling him forward. Sometimes he wondered, was this mine? Did I choose all this? Or did it choose me? Because there's a difference between living a dream and inheriting one. But each time he entertained the question, he'd find himself back in the weight room or back on the field, perfecting that same dead leg step he'd watched on film 5 days straight. And the answer returned, not in words, but in repetition. This wasn't about choice anymore. It was about becoming. Even if pressure had crept quietly into his bones, so had purpose. And purpose isn't given, it's grown. He kept growing it, day after day, the only way he knew how. Not for show, not for praise, but because something inside said this is the work that lasts. The letter sat on the kitchen table for 3 days before he opened it. Not because he wasn't curious. Because he already knew. Stanford, a school tucked beneath California trees, wrapped in red roofs and sunlight soft as parchment. A place where intellect whispered instead of shouted, and ambition didn't parade, it pulsed. He had offers from everywhere. Tennessee, Notre Dame, Oregon, with promises louder, flashier. Programs that flashed NFL logos like badges. But something about Stanford made him pause. Not out of hesitation, something deeper. Recognition. The quiet fit. Christian visited the campus in late spring. The kind of day where time moves slower, where bike tires hum like lullabies through shaded paths. He didn't say much during the tour, but he saw everything. The library steps worn smooth by silent midnight footsteps. The practice fields framed by eucalyptus. A quarterback stretching alone. No cameras. No fans. Just preparation. It all looked familiar. Like something he hadn't seen before, but already understood. Because Stanford felt like him. Not built to entertain. Built to evolve. Not chasing the spotlight. Willing to earn it after dark. At lunch, an assistant coach leaned toward him and said, "Here, we play smart. We work quieter than most." But the results? He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Christian looked down at his tray. Clean plate. Fork aligned. Unconscious order. He realized then, this wasn't just a football decision. This was identity. Because even with the roar of offers, the noise of recruiters, the future tugging in all directions, something inside him whispered, "Find a place where greatness doesn't need to be explained. Find a place that moves like you do." He went home, didn't make a social media post, didn't turn it into a show. He told his dad in the kitchen over eggs. Told his brothers while they tossed a football in the driveway. Told no one else until the papers were signed. When asked why Stanford, he only said, "It feels right." But more than anything, it felt quiet. And in that quiet, he could begin again. Not as a name, not as someone's son, but as a student, a player, a body with speed and a mind sharpened by solitude. What he didn't know then, what no one really knows, was that the hardest lessons at Stanford wouldn't come from professors. They would come from every morning he walked out onto that sun-soaked practice field, and had to prove again and again that whispers could win. That quiet doesn't mean soft. That humility is its own kind of weapon. And that's somewhere underneath all that California calm. He was about to wake up the world. Not overnight, but closer now. Closer than ever. Freshman year moved slowly. Christian learned to carry pads before he carried touches. Learned to wait his turn in meeting rooms, to nod more than speak, to stand just behind the huddle and listen for things not said. Upperclassmen owned the field, and that was okay with him. At first, he lifted, he studied, he ran drills until the sun sank and the shadows stretched long across the grass. Nobody called his name yet, but that didn't stop him from showing up like they had. He wasn't looking for the spark. He was preparing for the match. That first year, he played a little. Flashes, returns, quick shifts between bodies twice his size. Sometimes the camera caught him in motion. Most times it didn't, but he wasn't chasing acknowledgement. He was feeling the ground, mapping it. Truth is, sophomore season didn't erupt. It unfolded. A few longer carries, a little less waiting, then, a moment. A cold afternoon against USC. Grass slick, defense fast, one spin move, one stiff arm, 68 yards of silence turned static. The crowd rose, but Christian didn't. He just adjusted his gloves and lined up again. By the end of that game, the nation started to whisper. By mid-season, it wasn't whispers anymore. It was records. 1 week, 3 touchdowns. The next, 250 all-purpose yards. Then 300. Then more. History melted before the season could finish writing itself. He moved like he was painting with speed. Brushstrokes in cleats. Vision stitched tight to instinct. It wasn't the power that stunned them. It was the grace. The patience at the line before the cut. The hesitation step that fooled defenders twice. Then gone. He didn't celebrate. He exhaled. Every post-game interview was a quiet deflection. O-line played great tonight. Just glad we got the win. As if even in dominance, he preferred humility to highlight. But somewhere behind the stats, a kind of solitude crept in. Success arrived so quickly, handed with applause that felt louder than he liked. He wasn't anonymous anymore, not on campus, not in class, not walking to get a protein shake. "Aren't you McCaffrey?" Familiar question. Different weight. Sometimes he wanted to run toward the noise. Other days, away from it. Because while everyone cheered the touchdowns, no one saw the ice baths that followed. The silence of recovery rooms. The ache that sleep couldn't quite undo. He worked harder anyway. Because the standards had changed. Expectations, too. Each game became a mirror. And in them, he searched. Not for praise, but for proof. That this wasn't luck. That the potential everyone had projected was real. Even now, there were doubters. Not strong enough to last. System numbers. Heisman talk is cute, but come on. He heard them. Even as praise rang louder, criticism cut deeper. Not because it hurt. Because it echoed something he still sometimes asked himself in the quiet. Am I truly this good? But he didn't dwell. He returned to the tape. Overlap, rewind, scribble. Count steps. Memorize leverage. Not to silence the world. To steady himself. Because greatness isn't what they call you. It's what you become when no one's watching. And in that second year by the bay, with numbers swelling and spotlights circling, Christian remained still. Focused. Present. The world was now awake. But the way he moved, the way he led, still felt like a secret few understood. The night of the ceremony, he wore a suit cut close to the body, navy, subtle pinstripes, no flash. The kind you choose when you don't want to speak louder than the moment. He sat with his family. Smiled when they smiled. Kept his hands folded in his lap. The cameras panned across the finalists, shoulders squared, hearts thudding under immaculate ties. Christian had the numbers. 3,864 all-purpose yards, more than anyone, ever. More than Reggie. More than Barry. More than Logic. He didn't say this, of course. Had never once campaigned. Had never once uttered the word, Heisman, even when it whispered his name through every headline in late November. He just played, and then the envelope opened. Not him, someone else. The crowd clapped. Christian clapped too. Leaned in, nodded, willed himself into the background like he always had. He had practiced this grace. Years of slipping past praise, blending speed with humility. But still, the silence inside that moment? It ached a little. He didn't blink much, didn't shift in his seat. But for a heartbeat, he felt the shadow leave the room. Felt it move toward someone else. A spotlight stepping right past him. Later, some would say race played a role. Others said geography, time zones, conferences. That the West Coast doesn't echo loud enough at midnight back east. But Christian didn't say anything. He flew home the next day with his parents. Sat by the window. Listened to the hum of engines and the unsaid words beneath them. He didn't feel bitter. Just sharper. Just a little more awake to how the world worked. Recognition, he realized, isn't always given in the right season. Sometimes it comes 2 winters late. Sometimes never. But the game? The game didn't lie. The field still answered, and he still asked. That off-season, he trained harder. Not furiously. Just precisely. Polished patience into instinct. Turned that quiet pain into something strong enough to carry. Because loss, when held delicately, can become fuel. And Christian? He carried it like a lantern. Didn't talk about it. Didn't post about it. Just ran. Just lifted. Just studied more tape. Some said the snub would define him. But the truth was simpler. It refined him. And in the stillness after, in a dorm room dim with dawn, he wrote one sentence at the top of his journal, in ink that barely pressed through the page. They don't have to believe in you, for it to be real. He packed slowly. Not because it was hard to leave, because it was hard to explain why. Around him, the Stanford campus moved like always. Bikes zipped past arches. Professors nodded behind glasses. Sunlight stretched softly across the lawn like it had all year. But something had shifted in Christian. He wasn't running from anything. Not even toward something. Just forward. His final season had come and gone, echoing with highlights and hesitations. The numbers stayed strong, the praise came too, but so did the whispers, about durability, about draft prep, about whether he'd skip the bowl game. He did, quietly, respectfully, said it was time to begin the next chapter. That no moment should be taken from the dream just ahead. Some understood, some criticized, but he didn't argue either way. Because the decision wasn't about debate. It was about direction, and he'd made his. He said goodbye in pieces. One hallway at a time. A nod to the field at sunrise. An extra beat standing still inside the locker room. Some teammates got hugs. Some just a look. No social media announcement. No camera speech. Just packed bags. A door closed with practiced carefulness, like he didn't want the echo to linger. Back home in Colorado, the days slowed for a week or two. Familiar roads. Family dinners. Cold mornings with warm coffee and soft questions about the road ahead. He answered what he could. But some dreams aren't spoken. They're protected. The NFL loomed. Scouts, agents, combined prep, critiques disguised as curiosity. Is he too light? Can he handle the hits? A gadget guy? A specialist? Even after everything, there was doubt. But he didn't meet it with noise. He met it with breath, with treadmill sweat and stopwatches ticking in shadows. He journaled more. A list of things no one else could see. Not goals. Truths. Lines like, run your race. Speak with play. Don't chase noise. Carry peace. When friends asked how he felt, he always answered the same. Grateful. Ready. And he was. But even readiness comes wrapped in uncertainty. Because what happens when the dream finally opens its door? When the boy who once sprinted under moonlight for no reason now runs beneath lights built to burn. Stanford had given him roots. Time had given him resilience. And now, the future handed him a mirror. Soon, the draft would call. And with it, a new state. A new system. New expectations, doubts, headlines. But before all that, there was this. A soft winter evening. Christian outside, alone on the porch. No headphones. No phone. No plan. Just snow starting to fall. And him, hands in pockets, watching it land. The world around him quiet. Like it was waiting for something to begin. Again. The lights were too bright. Not stadium lights. Not yet. Just the kind they use on draft night, overhead, hot, meant to shine. The kind that's supposed to make everything feel like a dream, but instead makes your collar tighter. Christian sat between his parents, suit pressed, hands resting like he'd practiced it. Not fidgeting, not posing, just holding still. The cameras blinked in and out, scanning the room like birds with glass eyes. Every player there had something to prove. Christian had something to protect. His peace. His friends texted throughout the night. Old teammates sent good luck wishes. But his phone stayed face down. Because the dream wasn't the call. It was what came after. They told him he'd go early. Top 15, maybe top 10. Still, every minute passed like it had weight. The longer he waited, the more the questions started to hum under the table. About size, style, position. Things that didn't show up on tape, but always showed up in whispers. A few picks in, teams made trades. Hats passed across velvet tables. The room shifted subtly. Then, the call. Unknown number. He excused himself from the table. Quiet, not rushed. Christian? This is Coach Rivera from Carolina. We're taking you next. You ready? He didn't shout, didn't jump, just smiled, said thank you, maybe twice. When the pick was announced, he hugged his mom first. Then his dad, posed with the jersey. The smile was honest, but it came with something else. Not nerves. Responsibility. He pulled the Panthers cap down low on his head. Not to hide, just to feel the fit. It was snug. Everything unfamiliar was. Back at the hotel, he slipped the suit jacket off, laid it gently across the bed, sat a while. He thought about nothing and everything, plays he hadn't run yet, blocks he hadn't felt, teams that hadn't planned for him. He was top 10, but even that came with qualifiers in media headlines. Size in question. Can he hold up as a lead back? Fit for today's NFL? He read them, didn't carry them, not out loud, but inside, that familiar flicker sparked. Let them wonder. Let them calculate and measure. Christian would answer with motion, like always. He'd gone from backyard snow to Palo Alto sun, and now Carolina humidity waited for him. He ran his hand along the edge of the draft table one last time before leaving. Not sentiment, just instinct. He'd remember how this night felt, tight suit, warm lights, soft doubt. And one day, maybe years from now, when the jersey was faded and people asked how it all started, he might not say it was that phone call. He might say it was the moment just after, when everyone was celebrating, and he was already thinking, time to get to work. He arrived in Charlotte before dawn. No cameras, no press conference, just a plane landing in anonymity, and a worn duffel bag over his shoulder. Carolina blue skies stretched wide. The humidity wrapped around him like a handshake with a promise in its grip. He didn't flinch. Rookie camp came fast. Playbook pages like a foreign language at first, but Christian stayed late. Asked better questions. Listened harder. They gave him touches immediately. He made it look easy. Cuts as clean as breath. Catches like clockwork. The defense thought they closed the gap. Then it was too late. The media circled soon after. Undersized. Not a traditional back. Is he built for the league? He answered with runs. With roots. With routines no one saw. Not carved for applause, but grown from repetition. He didn't miss lifts. Didn't miss tape. Didn't miss chances. The touchdowns came. Then the highlight reels. Then the fantasy football praise. Still, the whispers followed. System player. Too light. One injury away. A nice gadget, not a cornerstone. Christian never responded. Not with words. He responded with off-seasons no one watched. With custom sleep regimens and nutrition tracked like time zones. With footwork sharpened in silence. With hand strength built one fingertip at a time, catching bricks behind closed doors. In year 2, he added weight. Not flash, not bulk, just armor. The kind forged from wear. And readiness. Teammates took notice. He ran harder. Stood longer in the storm of defenders. Took hits square to the chest and came back to the huddle with breath already steady. By year 3, he didn't just belong, he led. He read safeties at the line. Changed angles before the snap. Picked up blitzes that hadn't fully formed. He didn't play running back. He played forward. And yet, the headlines rarely change. Can he hold up? Will it last? The praise came layered in concern, like his body was a question wrapped in highlight clips. He heard it, of course he did, but instead of chasing answers, he took the ball. And moved, one silent touch at a time. They measured his stats, 1,000 rushing, 1,000 receiving, only 2 others had done it. They called it historic. He called it work. His teammates trusted him without asking. Because he never missed the cracks, the little habits, the film frame skipped, the defenders tell on 3rd down. They called him a dual threat. But to Christian, that was just a label. He didn't want to be multiple. He wanted to be whole. Complete. So he ran every run like it wasn't optional. Caught every pass like it was the last one he'd ever be thrown. And somewhere between all the doubt tossed in his direction, somewhere behind the stats and soft-spoken pressers, something happened. Belief. Not the loud kind, but the kind that comes from Sundays filled with sweat, and Mondays filled with movement, and Tuesdays spent in film rooms with lights down and notebooks open. He didn't try to be a star. He just refused to fade. And in Carolina, under summer skies and southern noise, he carved his own space. Not loud, but lasting. The season ended, and Christian didn't stop. While teammates took vacations, wanted ones, needed ones, he slipped into a schedule more precise than a metronome. Back in the weight room, film loaded before sunrise, cold plunges drawn like baths for monks. He tracked calories like they were currency. Measured sleep in decimals, 8.2, 7.9, journaled soreness, documented thresholds, not because someone told him to, because something in him demanded it. There was no summit, no arrival, only refinement. Every inch a future defender might stretch, he planned for it. Every check down that might turn into a first down, he rehearsed it. The game, to Christian, was not a season. It was a discipline. Mondays weren't for rest. They were for edges. Cryotherapy chambers. Blood panels. Mobility drills so minor and specific they seemed like movements only he would notice. No entourage. No photographer lining up labored effort for display. Just him. And the quiet. He needed that quiet. Because success echoed now, louder than it used to. Endorsements called. Headlines reframed him. From question mark to engine. But praise, like criticism, was outside noise. And Christian had learned to respect noise, not absorb it. In a corner of his home gym, he hung a small note. Attention brings pressure. Detail brings peace. He lifted with headphones sometimes. Not for music but for rhythm. Not to block the world out, but to hold himself in. In the film room, he started seeing plays before they happened, not memories but forecasts. Tendencies seeded in months of absorption. How that corner dropped his hips too early. How that linebacker shaded half a step too wide against motion. It wasn't talent anymore. It was study. Before the sun had burned the dew off Carolina blades, Christian had already completed drills older backs skipped. Not because he feared regression, because he feared complacency. He wanted to be durable, sure. Lean, strong. But underneath all of it, he wanted to be available. For every play. For every teammate who counted on him. For the game itself. He didn't chase greatness. He chased reliability. No highlight clip lasts longer than trust. One trainer said, "He doesn't walk into the room like a star. He walks in like a craftsman." There were still days when it ached. When the grind blurred into itself. When his body begged for pause. But he kept the rituals. Paid the tolls. Because there's a kind of quiet sacrifice in becoming elite that rarely shows itself in award ceremonies or video boards. It's in the fifth set no one asks for. The rewatch of film no one critiques. The stretching series done just to prevent a pull that might not even come. Christian didn't mistake discipline for obsession. He saw it as devotion. And devotion, once accepted, becomes a kind of worship. Of the craft. Of the moment. Of the game that never promises it'll give back what you give in. But he gave anyway. Fully. Privately. Because while the world judged by stats, Christian measured by sacrifice. And in that silent ledger, he had already been winning. It didn't happen all at once. First, a tightness in the leg. Nothing major, just a tweak, a whisper. He'd felt worse before, trained through it, ignored it, like you do when the body murmurs but doesn't scream. But then came the pull. The kind that stops movement mid-thought. Practice halted, trainers rush in, a hamstring uncoils, and suddenly, time stretches longer than any sprint. He sat on the bench, eyes forward, jaw still. Not in pain, not just pain, in disbelief. Because for years, he'd written his story in motion. In availability. In control. And now, the very thing he trusted, his body, had gone quiet in a different way. The rehab started. Icy baths. Measured returns. The usual. But when he came back, it was there again. A twist. An ankle this time. A different page, same chapter. And again, out. The headlines started changing. From "Rising Legend" to "Injury Prone." Analysts dropped his name in the same breath as risk. Fans speculated about his future before he'd even finished writing his present. He tried to stay still. Focused. Grateful. But that's the thing with injury, it's not just about your body breaking. It's about trust. He could recite plays in his sleep, but now his own limbs felt like strangers. Every step came with a thought. Every cut with a question. Was that too much? Is it going again? Am I still myself? Teammates tried to lift him. Coaches encouraged. Family reminded him of everything he'd done already. But Christian didn't want yesterday. He wanted today. He wanted to run a simple route without his calf flinching like it had memory. He wanted Sundays without the silence of a scratch list. Injury is a strange kind of isolation, not always physically but emotionally. The team moves on, the system adjusts, and you wait. You wait in ice, in tape, in rooms that smell like antiseptic and time. He never lashed out, didn't complain, just came in earlier, stayed later, redid everything, rebuilt from core to ankle to mind. But beneath the discipline, beneath the protocol, a quieter doubt flickered. Not a storm, just questions, laid end to end. Will I be who I was? Do I still belong? Am I still what they expect? Or worse, am I only what I was? Even so, he worked. Not to prove anything to critics, or coaches, or fans refreshing fantasy scores. He worked to believe again. Because a healed muscle is one thing. A healed trust? That takes different work. Inside that Carolina facility, before sunrise, there was a figure stretching, cutting, moving without cameramen. Sometimes limping, sometimes stopping mid-drill to breathe, not from exertion, from restraint. He could feel the speed still there. The rhythm, the deep-tuned instinct. But now, another presence moved with him. Caution, not fear, just remembrance of what's been lost, and what it cost. He didn't tell anyone how hard it was to sit while games played on. To watch highlights from a sideline bench. To feel like, for the first time, the game was passing him by. But he held it quietly. Carried it like he carried everything. Close, softly, humbly. Because he knew, some comebacks don't shout. They return step by step, whispering, "I'm still here." Charlotte quieted when he did. He walked the halls of the facility slower now. Not limping, just absent of urgency. Trainers greeted him with familiarity, not fanfare. Not the face of the franchise, just someone trying to be whole again. He sat through meetings, took notes like a rookie. Scribbled in the margins, nodded as if every play still lived in his body, even if his body refused to join. Outside, headlines moved on. The league, like the world, does not wait. New stars rose. Fantasy rosters adjusted. Christian's name fell down the scroll. And yet, he stayed. In the film room longer than most. Not to feel included, but to stay connected. He watched games like puzzles, rewinding the smallest mistakes until he could see them before they happened. There was no bitterness, just observation. A man studying blueprints for a house he wasn't allowed to enter, for now. Practice fields echoed without him. Cleats struck turf in rhythms he remembered. He'd jog out sometimes, stretch, smile, but the snaps belonged to others. And when he returned to the locker room early, uniform untouched, he did it without a sound. This kind of waiting teaches you who you are when they forget, how much you love something that may never love you back the same way again. Teammates were kind, supportive, but eventually they stopped offering updates. Because silence settles in when there's no timeline. And Christian never gave them one. He just kept showing up. Same parking spot, same oatmeal before sunrise. A soldier in peacetime, armor strapped, battle distant. Some fans called him done. A once glimmer pressed into a stat column. But he didn't fight it. He just listened to the whispers. Then turned them down, not because he couldn't argue, but because he didn't need to anymore. He no longer needed to convince anyone. Just correct the course. On the rare nights he let himself feel the weight of it, he sat alone, back against the bleachers, frost crawling toward his laces, looking at the field like it might look back. Sometimes the loudest dreams are the ones that go quiet first. But dying and resting aren't the same. And doubt isn't an end. It's a question waiting for breath. Christian knew his breath was still there. So he kept sharpening the blade. No certainty, just faith, because even in stillness, he was preparing for motion. The call came on a Thursday. The kind of afternoon that feels quiet for no reason. Christian was in the facility, taping, stretching, watching film like any other day. Then the GM walked in. Voice low, eyes steady. "We're trading you," he said. "San Francisco." Silence. Not shock. Just stillness. He nodded. Didn't say much. Didn't need to. This was the business. But as he packed what little could fit in a duffel and drove home that night, something sat with him. Not loss, not betrayal. Rerouting. He thought of all he'd given to Charlotte. The games. The grit. The literal blood left on grass no one else remembered. He didn't regret any of it. But the thing about being still for too long? Eventually, motion feels like mercy. The 49ers hadn't called simply out of need. They called with belief. Shanahan's voice over the phone didn't sound like strategy. It sounded like recognition. "We don't want a piece," he said. "We want you. All of you." That night, in his apartment surrounded by boxes, Christian sat alone at the table, contract folded, not signed. He stared out at a skyline he once thought he'd grow old in, and let the weight of goodbye settle. He thought about the first touchdown, the first jersey, the first time he looked into the crowd and felt their belief. And then he thought of the recent games. The empty snaps, the cheers given in pause. The versions of himself he missed. He stood quietly, opened the sliding door, stepped into the night. Somewhere beneath the October wind, something clicked into him again. Not closure. Permission. He boarded the plane without fanfare. Hoodie up, eyes down. Next to him, a worn playbook from a different life, zipped half open. And when the wheels touched down in California, and the jetway hissed open, he didn't smile. But he breathed. The bay greeted him not harsh or grand, but gently. Just enough fog to remind you the future isn't always clear. Just enough sun to tell you it still shows up anyway. He met the team that night. Brief introductions, playbook walkthrough, jokes, handshakes, confusion. But in the eyes of the coaches, not panic. Expectation, as if they already knew what he could be. And for the first time in a long time, so did he. He took the field in warm-ups wearing red and gold. Different colors, different air. And as he warmed up beneath that coastal sky, there was something noticeably absent. The weight, not of pressure, of proving. He didn't need to be right anymore. He just needed to run. And somewhere in the back of his mind, beyond the drills and play installs, he heard something again. The old language, the cadence of the game before it got complicated. Before legacy, before expectation, a rhythm, his rhythm, not rewritten, just remembered. He didn't explode. He eased in. First game, a few carries. A couple of catches. Then a pass. Yes, a pass, for a touchdown. 3 ways to score in the blink of a debut. No parade, just execution. The coaches nodded. No disbelief, just confirmation. The fit was instant. Not because the playbook bent to him. Because he bent to the playbook. At practice, they said he moved like music. At game speed, like scripture. Because every cut came with intention. Every motion opened space no one else could find, like he was slipping through cracks other players didn't even see. The offense didn't just hum. It changed. Every snap became a riddle he already knew the answer to. They called him versatile. He just called it football. With the 49ers, it wasn't about reviving something lost. It was about reactivating what had been waiting. Because his body, finally healthy, was no longer protecting. It was attacking. Scoring became second nature. Vision, sharper. Patience, deeper. And the system? Built for precision. Built for someone who could slow down just enough to see it all unfold, and accelerate when no one else could. And Christian? He wasn't trying to prove anything anymore. He was just being. In December, he broke through piles that used to stop him. In January, in colder breath, he slipped between linebackers who guessed wrong, because guessing was never enough to find him. He laughed more in meetings. Stayed longer after practice. Even his teammates said they could feel it. Something at peace. A man not chasing anything. But finally being chased again. Post-game interviews stayed modest. He still gave credit elsewhere. Still said, "We," more than "I." But there was a weight to his presence now. Not mass. Purpose. He wasn't just a highlight reel. He was a metronome. Steady. Precise. Essential. One coach said, when he's on the field, things feel organized. And Christian smiled quietly when he heard that. Because that's all he ever wanted. To bring clarity to chaos. Not with volume, with rhythm, with runs that looked like stories told backward. With hands that caught silence and stitched it into progress. The fans embraced him with arms wide but expectations quiet, like they somehow knew. This wasn't a comeback, it was a continuation. He'd carried the weight, now he carried the ball. Same hands, new meaning, and each yard gained wasn't revenge. It was return, not to an old version of himself, but to something deeper, defined not by what he escaped, but by what he chose to become. Something had changed, not speed, he still had that. Not vision, it remained unblinking. And not drive, that ran deeper now, sediment solid at the bottom of everything he did. What changed was his presence. He'd stopped running through the game. He started running within it. Each cut, each motion, refined. Sharper, but somehow softer around the edges, like a blade that chose when to slice and when to glide. He didn't just react, he anticipated. As if the field spoke its secrets a half-second early, but only to him. Teammates noticed, so did the coaches. He became the cadence. The play clock could have ticked slower the way he moved, so patient, it almost defied what the game was supposed to look like. Christian no longer needed the play to work. He made it work. A block missed? He adjusted. A defender overpursued? He disappeared, calmly, then reappeared 5 yards later with the same breath and balanced shoulders. They stopped calling him a weapon. Because weapons are used. Christian became something else. Something closer to a compass. Games turned, subtly, when he touched the ball. Coverage bent to follow him. Linebackers overthought the ordinary. Safeties forgot their rules. But he didn't take advantage with arrogance. He adjusted the tempo with grace. Even when he didn't touch the ball, the defense tilted with worry. They watched him, and in doing so, forgot the rest of the field existed. That was his presence, one that reminded quietly. Control needn't be loud to be complete. In a late-season drive, the huddle was chaos, short clock, wrong personnel, noise swelling. He looked to the quarterback, nodded once. "I've got it," motioned with his hand. No disagreement, no panic. The play, improvised. The result, 6. No celebration. Just a glance back, eyes calm. As if to say, this is the job. And that's how he played. Like it was a craft. Not a stage. Like he loved the texture of the game more than its outcome. He stopped chasing recognition, if he ever did. And in doing so, the game started to catch up with him. Analysts debated his rankings. He never joined the conversation. Because conversation happens on networks. He made his case on grass. And as the postseason loomed, with everything sharpened and weighted, he didn't lean harder. He leaned back. He simplified. He smiled. He watched film with curiosity, not need. Poised in the calm between brilliance and burden. Because he finally understood. This wasn't about maxing out his body. It was about calming his mind. There's a point when a player evolves beyond instinct. Beyond ability. Where movement becomes intention. Where rushing yards feel less like numbers, and more like brushstrokes. The field no longer felt like an opponent. It felt like a canvas. And Christian? He painted patiently, deliberately, like someone who'd already seen the masterpiece. And was simply bringing the rest of us along, one step at a time. The question was never if he was great. It was how quietly he could stay that way. By now, the numbers had grown loud. Rushing, receiving, touchdowns that stitched together seasons. Stat sheets that felt less like performance and more like prophecy fulfilled. Commentators started whispering legacy. Most versatile ever? Best all-purpose back of his generation? They debated metrics. Yards per touch. Snap efficiency. Value over replacement. But Christian never entered that room. Never knocked on the door. For him, the work didn't change just because the world started noticing it. He still arrived early. Still practiced habits no one charted. Still left fields with grass-stained socks and a face that looked more like gratitude than pride. The praise didn't distract him. It softened in his ears, like distant applause when the play's already over. His teammates began referring to him differently, not as star, but as constant. Reporters started looking for clues. What drove him, what milestone he was chasing next. He gave them nothing performative. Just humility. Just reflections lined in service. The line did their job. It's about the team. I'm lucky to be healthy. But inside, he knew. Not arrogance. Awareness. That he had become what few ever do. Not a burst of brilliance, not a flash in the algorithm, but a presence. A pillar. Football changed. Rules shifted. Schemes revolved. Christian remained. Not unmoved, but always moving with it. He didn't need to outshine others to define himself. Because legacy, to him, wasn't carved in public moments. It was found in the ones no one recorded. The reps when it was raining. The rehab days when nobody asked. The off-season hours when film rolled and silence answered back. Legacy, as he learned, isn't something you chase. It's something that forms in your wake, if you move with enough consistency. And now, when people spoke his name, it wasn't with surprise. It was with certainty, with respect that didn't need high-volume promotion. Just proof. And Christian had given the game proof. In sweat, in silence, in seasons that spoke through action. He didn't stand at podiums demanding a place in history. He stood in the end zone, ball in hand, eyes down, like always. Not asking the moment to remember him. Just honoring it, because the legacy was never about what he could take from the game. It was what he could leave behind. A way to play, a way to lead, a way to be great, without ever needing to say it out loud. Off-seasons brought the kind of quiet Christian had grown to appreciate. No schedule, no game plan. Just stretches of space too still for some, but not for him. He filled it with walks. Early workouts, not because anyone demanded them, but because motion still felt like home. One evening, Colorado dusk curling across the sky like an old song, he found himself back in the garage, where it all began. Same tools on the wall. Same dust on the shelves. Same folding chair his father used to sit in when the noise of life needed a pause. Ed was already there, elbow on the workbench, fingernails smudged with hardware. Not fixing anything, just passing time. Christian sat down beside him. No need for words. They'd spent lifetimes speaking through silence. After a moment, Ed nodded toward a shelf. The old Broncos helmet still there, scuffed, outdated, sacred. Neither man reached for it. Christian looked at it, then back down. How did it feel for you? He asked. Not pointing, not defining what it meant. His father breathed in, thought, exhaled, felt like a blur you didn't know was important until it slowed down, he said. But when it does, you hope you did it right. He paused, and if you didn't, you hope your kids do. The sentence lingered. Christian didn't smile, didn't nod, he just let it sit. They talked after that, but of smaller things. Family, Mom's cooking, Max's coaching gig, Luke's new project, quiet things, important things, and through it all lingered a shared understanding few families know. Because in that garage there wasn't a father reliving his past. And there wasn't a son chasing it. There were just two men who had carried the game and the name in different decades, with different burdens, for the same quiet reasons. Later that night, Christian flipped through an old photo album. Youth league shots, cleats too big, pads too crooked, his father on the sidelines, eyes watching but hands off. Each picture told him the same thing. Nothing was ever forced. Just offered, supported, believed in. And now, as he looked in the mirror back home, eyes steady, frame shaped by purpose, he didn't see someone who stepped out of a shadow. He saw someone who picked it up, studied it, then built something beside it. Something parallel, not rebellion, redefinition. Legacy, he realized, wasn't about repeating history. It was about carrying the best parts forward, and laying the rest down with grace. He stood quietly in that slow evening moment. Not as Ed's son, not as the 49ers star, but as Christian, whole, still, and finally, free. There are still mornings when he runs before the sun. No schedule, no stopwatch, just breath, just pace, just motion. No one's waiting for a stat line. No coach is printing plays. It's him, sneakers instead of cleats, sidewalk instead of turf. And yet, he runs the same way. Measured, present, listening for something that isn't there. Maybe that's what the great ones do when it ends, or begins again. They chase not victory but rhythm. The ritual of movement, the quiet church of repetition. Christian doesn't need to prove anything now. The story's been written 100 ways, analysts, stats, fans, critics. But none of them were in the backyard when it started. None of them saw the first journal, the first late sprint, the first whisper from a heart that knew. The game has room for more than just noise. They never saw the nights he prayed with tape on his fingers. Or the mornings he studied film like scripture. They only saw the fireworks. But Christian always moved to softer music. Even now, he doesn't seek the noise. He welcomes the stillness. After the games, after the records, after the conversations he never stepped into, he sits with it. The silence. The rare, golden quiet of having followed the fire long enough to finally feel warm. Sometimes he'll meet a young player, full of breath, full of brightness, and smile as they talk about goals, highlights, dreams linked to cameras and stages. And he won't lecture. He just listens. Maybe he remembers that feeling. The fresh pursuit. Before the wait. Before the whispers. Other times, he's just home. Family around him. Laughter in another room. His name no longer a vessel for expectation, just a name. He and his dad don't talk football much now. But occasionally, in the lull of conversation, one of them will say something simple. About grit, about quiet, and both will understand it wasn't ever about plays. It was about how you carried yourself when nobody was looking. What you gave to something, even when it didn't promise it would love you back. Christian still wakes early some days. Still stretches in silence. Still ties his shoes with care, even if the field is now a street he knows by muscle and memory. He'll jog a little, then pick up speed, not to escape, not to arrive, but just to move, because movement, always, was the message. And some fires don't burn out. They just learn how to glow gently, without needing to be seen.